Have you ever felt a moment repeat itself, not as memory, but as if reality hesitated before continuing? You're standing in a grocery store, reaching for something ordinary, and suddenly there's a flicker, not visual, not dramatic, just a subtle pause, like the scene recalibrated when your awareness sharpened. The air feels slightly denser, the colors seem fractionally brighter, and then it's gone. No glitch, no sound, no proof. Just the quiet sensation that something adjusted the instant you noticed it. Most people dismiss these moments. Fatigue, stress, imagination. But the feeling lingers, that sense of a hidden reality operating just beneath the surface of the visible one. As if your attention is not merely observing the world, but interacting with it in ways you can't quite articulate. Quantum consciousness isn't a phrase you use in daily conversation, yet the experience feels strangely aligned with it. The idea that awareness may participate rather than passively record. You don't tell anyone. It's too subtle to explain, too personal to prove. But you've felt it, that faint recalibration when thought and world briefly intersect. And if you've noticed it even once, then what you're about to see may not be theory. It may be recognition. If that subtle recalibration felt familiar, you're already part of this conversation. A quiet acknowledgement, even just pausing here, is a way of recognizing that the sensation wasn't random. And choosing to stay with this exploration isn't about subscribing to a channel. It's about following a thread your own awareness began pulling. If something in you has been noticing these shifts, leave a brief continuation of that thought below, beginning with, "I noticed that," and keep it honest and specific, because what physicists uncovered about observation will make that feeling far harder to dismiss. Because what physicists uncovered about observation will make that feeling far harder to dismiss. In 1927, at Bell Labs, physicist Clinton Davison, working alongside Lester Germer, conducted experiments that demonstrated electrons could behave like waves. Decades later, refinements of the double-slit experiment at institutions such as MIT and the University of Vienna confirmed something even stranger. When electrons are not measured, they form an interference pattern, behaving like a spread-out probability wave. But the moment a measuring device determines which slit an electron passes through, that interference pattern disappears. The electron behaves like a localized particle. The mere act of obtaining information changes the outcome. This became known as the observer effect, not because human eyes magically alter matter, but because interaction collapses probability. Before measurement, the electron exists in a superposition within the quantum field, described only by likelihoods. After interaction, one possibility becomes actual. And this means that you are not separate from the systems you engage with, not in a mystical sense, in a structural one. When you direct attention towards something, you are increasing interaction. When interaction increases, uncertainty narrows. The system stabilizes into a defined state. At the quantum level, that stabilization is measurable. At the psychological level, it feels like the subtle shift you've sensed. Like reality aligning itself the instant awareness locks in. Consciousness expansion, then, may not be about escaping the world. It may be about recognizing participation within it. Your attention is not a passive spotlight. It is a variable within the equation. The quantum field does not respond to belief, but it does respond to interaction. And perception is interaction. The fracture appears here. If observation alters behavior at the smallest scales, and attention alters stabilization at the cognitive level, where exactly is the boundary between physical measurement and conscious awareness? Because the next layer of this discovery suggests that the observer may not be as clearly defined as we assume. Because the next layer of this discovery suggests that the observer may not be as clearly defined as we assume. In 1997, neuroscientist Giulio Tononi introduced integrated information theory at the University of Wisconsin, proposing that consciousness corresponds to the degree of integrated information within a system, how unified and coherent its internal states are. Around the same time, researchers studying neural synchrony discovered that when large groups of neurons fire in coherent gamma oscillations, perception sharpens, clarity increases, separate signals lock into phase. Information becomes unified, and this explains why moments of sudden intuition often feel like internal alignment rather than new data arriving from outside. When neural networks shift from scattered activity into synchronized coherence, The brain doesn't receive more information. It stabilizes it. You feel it as a brief silence, a tightening of focus, a stillness behind the eyes, sometimes as a subtle pressure in the chest or a cooling sensation across the scalp. The body registers coherence before the mind labels it insight. Now return to physics. In quantum systems, coherence describes particles maintaining phase relationships across space. When coherence is lost, systems decohere. Probabilities collapse into classical outcomes. When coherence is maintained, interference patterns remain intact. Coherence preserves possibility. And this explains why internal clarity feels expansive rather than narrow. When neural coherence increases, perception widens while stabilizing. The world doesn't change shape, but your interpretation of it reorganizes instantly. That quiet internal silence is not mystical intervention. It is synchronized firing, a field of information moving into phase. Science, recognition, science. Integrated systems produce unified experience. Coherent quantum states preserve probability until interaction. Neural coherence sharpens perception. These are parallel processes operating at different scales, yet they echo one another in structure. And when you begin to recognize that your internal states mirror structural principles found in physical systems, something shifts psychologically. Not because you've gained control, but because you've lost the comfort of separation. Understanding this has a cost. It dissolves the illusion that your thoughts float independently inside your skull. It suggests that coherence, whether in neurons or in quantum states, is not isolated. And once you see coherence as participation rather than insulation, you can't fully return to the idea that awareness is neutral. And that realization carries weight. And that realization carries weight. Because once you sense that awareness participates rather than merely watches, something subtle shifts inside you. Conversations can feel thinner. Certain environments feel louder than they used to. You start noticing patterns in tone, timing, coincidence. Not in a dramatic way, just enough to feel slightly out of sync with the surface level of things. There's a quiet loneliness in that. Not because you're superior, not because you've discovered a secret, but because it's difficult to articulate the feeling that reality seems responsive in ways that aren't obvious to everyone else. You hesitate to speak about it. You question whether you're over-interpreting. You tell yourself it's just pattern recognition, just cognition doing what cognition does. And yet, the displacement lingers. Moments of sudden clarity can feel isolating. Intuition arrives, and instead of excitement, there's a brief pause. A recognition that you're standing slightly outside the automatic flow of the world. You notice how quickly others move on from experiences that felt significant to you. You wonder if you're imagining depth where there is none. That doubt is part of the cost. When you begin perceiving coherence in yourself, in systems, in interactions, you also begin noticing fragmentation. The contrast becomes sharper. The ordinary world doesn't disappear, but it feels thinner, less self-contained. And that discomfort isn't a flaw in you. It's a sign that something is reorganizing beneath the surface. Because the final insight isn't about controlling reality. It's about understanding what role you were already playing in it. It's about understanding what role you were already playing in it. The feeling of being slightly out of step, of sensing depth where others see surface, may not be a flaw in your wiring. It may be expanded perception, adjusting to its own implications. Not special, not chosen, simply more aware of interaction. We began with a hesitation in reality, a subtle recalibration when attention sharpened. We moved through the double-slit experiment and the observer effect, where interaction narrows probability within the quantum field. We traced neural coherence and integrated information, where synchronized activity produces clarity. Science did not prove magic. It revealed participation. And what unsettled you was not the data, it was the mirror. Because if observation stabilizes outcomes at the smallest scales, and coherence stabilizes perception in the brain, then the boundary between out there and in here becomes less rigid than you were taught. Not dissolved, but permeable. Your sense of difference may simply be sensitivity to that permeability. There is one final layer physicists still debate. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness is not produced by matter but correlated with fundamental information processes woven into reality itself. not as mysticism, as hypothesis. If information is primary and physical states emerge from it, then awareness may not be an accidental byproduct. It may be structurally embedded. That idea remains unresolved, and perhaps it should remain unresolved for now. Because once you consider that consciousness might not be confined to the skull, the question is no longer whether reality reacts when you think. It becomes something far quieter. What exactly is thinking through you? Maybe the real shift was never outside you. Maybe it was the quiet recognition that you've always been participating in something far more responsive than you were told. If this perspective resonated, staying with these explorations isn't about subscribing to a channel. It's about continuing a line of inquiry your own awareness initiated. In the next chapter, we go deeper into the quantum vacuum and the divine spark within you, where the field itself becomes the question. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.